Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman, and this week I want to learn how to not ship the org chart. What are you learning today, Mark?
Learning with you how not to ship the org chart.
Mark, I went and I wanted to buy a new electric vehicle, and I went and did a bunch of test drives. So I'm test driving every EV on the market. And I went and I sat in an unnamed electric vehicle, and the lady was, the person
They didn't name it?
selling. I don't want to name it because I don't want to have them email me and be mad. I sit in this thing, and she's like, "Okay, well, here's the shifter, and here's how you do it, and whatnot." And I kind of froze up, and I said, "I don't think I would be able to tolerate this car." And it was a weird thing to say, and I felt a little bit like that was awkward. And she says, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking at the map, and then I turn, and then I'm looking at the climate thing, and then I'm looking at the speedometer, and I can see the O, like the number O on the map is part of something, and an O as part of the temperature, and an O as part of the speedometer, and they're all different fonts." And then I realized it was 3 Android tablets chained together, and I could suddenly see the organizational chart of this large international auto company, and I realized that some group shipped the map thing, and some group shipped the climate thing, and some group shipped the speedometer thing, and then they stuck a bunch of Android devices behind a screen, and they called it the panoramic whatever screen. And I was like, they didn't even talk to each other. And then it overwhelmed me because the knobs, the buttons, they're all from different groups. They shipped the organizational chart of the company in a car that they want me to spend $40,000 on. So I didn't complete the test drive. Am I a bad person?
Well, isn't that a separate question?
Yeah, it is a separate question. But have you ever had that feeling that?
Yeah, I've had that feeling. And it's actually shipping the org chart is something. It's a phrase that's used at Microsoft.
Yeah,
a lot. Because we want to avoid shipping the org chart, but unfortunately, sometimes we do.
Yeah, I think all tech companies do that sometimes, though. Is the answer to have some Steve Jobs type Bill Gates at the top of the thing, and then they just I alone watch all things? Because that isn't really a good model.
No, I think that's one way to do it, but I think a more scalable, friendly way to do it is to come up with standards, like the UX gestures, and the UX language.
Mm-hmm.
That is one place that you can just say, here are the standards. When you design a UX for your feature component, here's your font, here's your spacing, here's the way the buttons are going to work. And then everybody can go read it and make sure they adhere to it. And then it looks consistent.
Yeah, some kind of this we believe. We can all get together, write a constitution, maybe amend it 26 times, and then everything will be great.
And I'll give you a concrete example of what we've done in Azure. For that, because when we started Azure Resource Manager, Azure Resource Manager is the control plane for Azure, and it's a decentralized control plane. It provides this entry point into Azure services, but the services implement resource providers that plug into ARM. And what we found was that early on that we needed to define standards for the APIs that these resource providers surfaced.
Okay.
So that they were consistent with ARM and with each other. And so when you wanted to go, for example, query a resource for a list of child objects, that query operation was the same across all of our resources and not different for one versus another. And so we came up with API Guideline Standards. It's published on GitHub. And we've got an API review board that and we've got tooling to try to ensure consistency. Guidelines are good, but tooling is even better. That just pushes you to do the right thing. But this is a place where we're not perfect and there's inconsistencies. And if you actually look at the older API surfaces of Azure, you'll find even more inconsistencies, but we continue to make it better.
I like the board idea. I was I had suggested maybe we should have, like a CTO or something, a boss, like a single person, but then that becomes a bottleneck.
Yeah.
But a board can be a bottleneck as well. Like I was playing around with Copilot in Visual Studio recently and looking at unused and commonly not used features. And I noticed that, well, in one instance, it's an icon of a bot. And in another instance, it's a pencil with sparkles. And in another one, it's a magic wand. And I was like, wow, the Copilot people haven't yet figured out what the metaphor is, and there should be like an icon board.
Yeah.
Boards like this are helpful because they can make things look consistent, but they would also slow down innovation, and they're really innovating at a very fast rate.
Well, it depends on how impactful an inconsistency might be. In the case of an icon, it's like, okay, so user might get confused or look at it and go, "This is inconsistent," and it might hurt their impression of the polish of the product, which is a different level of impact than an API or multiple APIs that are different, that force developers to go, wait a minute, I've learned this way to do it over here, and now I've got to learn this completely other way to do it over here. And that causes them friction and turmoil, time, tedium, and potentially even leads them to make mistakes. And it's something that can't just be fixed because of backward compatibility. It's going to be there forever. And so, 10 years down the road, somebody coming across those same APIs goes, yeah, like this and that, versus an icon, which, okay, next rev will just make it consistent and fix it. So it depends on how important the inconsistency is.
See, now you're making me feel like I shouldn't have left my test drive because I thought it was important. Like
they're gonna have a software upgrade in a month, and it'll all be fixed.
Well, seriously, can we all just agree on a font here? Like, I didn't think it was that unreasonable. I just found it very off-putting.
Yeah.
That I was looking at 3 Android tablets strung together. But but this is the thing. I have empathy because I can imagine the teams making the decisions to string this stuff together. It was very Franken build.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder those are just the visual systems. Here's another thing. That's just the part that they put on the front and put a screen on. What internal systems are shipping the org chart?
It makes you start to question that, because if it had been consistent on the top, you'd assume it's consistent throughout. So that's and basically they lost a sale because of that. So that you could say that it was impactful and they should go prioritize fixing it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important, like that. The experience somebody has, the visible experience somebody has, because you just infer the rest from that.
Yeah, that's right. I did infer that, like, if this is the skin of the onion, what else is going on inside this thing? Is it rotten?
And meanwhile, if it had been all consistent, you're like, let's make sure this is consistent, but everything else is completely inconsistent, you wouldn't have known.
Well, that's really interesting. So, like, let's invert that and let's think about another unnamed electric car that is well known for being very consistent from a UI perspective. That's very polished. It's the iPhone of cars, but there's been talk that the internals may not be as shiny. So that is the inverted problem, where the design is gorgeous, but maybe the guts are less awesome.
Yeah, and the importance of that depends, of course, on how much the internal inconsistencies are going to cause problems.
Yeah.
For example, if you talk about a cloud platform like Azure, internal inconsistencies actually cause problems because, again, that leads to mistakes. That leads to additional time to go troubleshoot something. In the case of a live site incident, for example, I've got to do it this way over here and another way over here. It causes extra engineering costs too, because if you want to apply some improvement to something, now you've got to make 3 versions of the improvement because every place you want to apply it is slightly different, versus if I can just improve it in one place, one way, and apply it to everything, then I've saved a lot of time and energy, and I've actually made sure the improvement is reliable in once without having to do it 3 times, where every time I do it, I could be making mistakes. So consistency inside of a platform is extremely important. But like you said, moving it quickly for innovation, that's the way Azure started. We had to move very quickly. And then, you don't have enough time to, like, what is the design paradigm for the icon, the equivalent of the icon inside of our API surfaces in the platform. We don't have time to slow down and decide because we don't even know really yet. We're innovating, and then you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, this way of doing it is better than these other ways. Let's all standardize.
It makes me think about the kind of like the layers of abstraction that sit on top of things in order to kind of clean up. Like you've got ARM, the Azure Resource Manager. You've got Bicep, which is kind of like the TypeScript of the JavaScript of ARM. Using that analogy, like it's a little bit of layer that makes it better. And then the UI, the UX, the portal that's calling all of those things and using all of those things is in some cases lying to you in a good way to make this experience seem consistent.
Yeah.
While also maintaining backwards compatibility going back many, many years, which is something I think Microsoft doesn't get a lot of credit for, that should get credit for.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a principle of Azure. And Windows has had this too. You could still run Doom on your Windows 11 machine.
The example I gave was that you can still run, you can on 64-bit, but for a very, very long time on 32-bit, you could run VisiCalc. You could run Dan Bricklin's VisiCalc from 1976.
Yeah,
I just got a DOSBox set of DOS games called ExoDOS, which is like all of the 80s, and it works great on Windows. It runs on ARM Windows.
That's incredible. It's just amazing, and that's the backward compatibility promise, which is extremely important in the enterprise. Not so important in the consumer space, but extremely important in the enterprise because enterprises develop apps. Every time you break an app, that costs the enterprise time, money, and maybe even prevents them from going to a newer version of the system, which is going to give them a lot of benefits for security, reliability, features. So backward compatibility is absolutely essential. And we have actually part of that API review board we talked about. It approves breaking changes, and I'm the arbiter for breaking change approvals and our standards around that, as well as deprecation of services. Because removing a service is also a breaking change that we take very seriously. So we've got published policies around SDK deprecations, service deprecations, announcements, channels that are formal around how we tell people it's coming, and a process that ensures that we're not doing it capriciously and only for good reason, and that there's good path forward. And so that's just part of an enterprise promise.
So this is a good time to remind folks that have made it this far into the show that this is our opinions. And while we may work for Microsoft, we didn't work for Microsoft a very long time before this, and after this, we may not work for Microsoft. So what I'm about to say is my opinion. I'm a fan of Windows. I enjoy Windows. I have an iPhone. I'm non-denominational. I have an iPad. So I kind of move calmly and smoothly through things. But oftentimes I admire how consistent and self-consistent iPhones and Macs are in their look and feel. And I am frustrated where Windows things are like, why does this look like this? Why does this behave like this? But then I dig into it, like how the window compositor works in Windows and the different UI frameworks and stuff. And I'm like, why can't we do this? And I realized that a lot of the things that Apple has done to make things look so quote unquote pretty, and some of the things that Windows gets dinged for are, Windows chooses to have backwards compatibility and in the process possibly ship the org chart. While Apple, with a smaller market share on the desktop and a very large walled garden on the mobile side, choose to unapologetically break stuff and abandon entire this one. And the first time that we did that was the Windows 11 security stuff, where people are still mad that their processors, in some instances, their older Intel processors, are being left behind. It's interesting to see how often Apple can do that, and people are like, celebrate the change. But if Microsoft makes your 15-year-old laptop no longer work on the latest operating system, they're like, you suck. But there's a reason for it, and the org chart and the values that they have as an organization for backwards compatibility are kind of like at the forefront of that.
And I think it's consumer versus enterprise is a big, priority.
Yeah, that's a good point. You have like SLAs, service level agreements on how things are going to work, and there's, well, shoot, dude, I was running my blog on Windows Server 2002 or 2000, like an early version of Windows Server for like 20 years. What's that?
2003.
2003.
Yeah. Windows
Server 2003 and .NET 2. And I stopped running it only because I couldn't get TLS 1.3 to work on a 20-year-old operating system. And that's when I finally moved. But the cool part was I was able to move to containers.
So you were
Linux
incredibly
and
insecure.
Azure. Say that again, sir?
You were incredibly insecure. You were running on an unsupported version of the operating system that was no longer getting security fixes. So you're lucky your website wasn't just owned.
Well, nobody visits my website, but
true too.
Yeah. I was impressed though that the compatibility lasted as long as it did. Like, we should get credit for that, I think.
Yeah.
When you're trying to avoid shipping the org chart, but you're also at the top of the org chart, is it frustrating? Like, or do you just have to like make compromises and say, well, this is just the way it's got to be. We're going to have to let that abstraction leak, because you say that you're the arbiter of some of these decisions at that board level.
Well, I mean, what we do is try to identify places where we need to prevent leaks and fix them. I mean, it's frustrating for me to see the leaks, to see the inconsistencies. But again, like, we only have so much, I only have so much time and energy to go catching these things. And we only have so much energy to go and fix these. We have to prioritize where are the most important places we need to be consistent and prioritize those. And even in those areas, like API reviews, like, what are the most important aspects of an API surface that must be consistent? And then that's where we invest time and energy and reviewing, and also coming up with tooling that helps ensure that those things are just consistent from the start and not something. So we actually have speaking of type spec, we've got something called TypeScript, which is TypeScript. We've got something called TypeSpec.
Yeah.
Which is a language we've created for defining APIs. And using TypeSpec, which supports inheritance, we can define standards at a top level that get inherited by the API developers, creating new resource providers, so that they're automatically compliant with our type or API guidelines.
That's a great way to not ship the org chart, is to give something teeth. I used to use the term Word documents don't break the build. So someone goes and writes a Word doc, and someone publishes an API that breaks something, and nothing about the Word document broke the build, set off a klaxon, called anybody, no one got paged. But with something like TypeSpec, when you can go and describe the shape of something and then project it across REST, GraphQL, gRPC, whatever, you could put constraints on the shipping to prevent something from leaking out that would show the org chart or break something that we believe as a group. So you're giving teeth to the spec by making it formal.
So there's 3 degrees on this spectrum of consistency, or 4. There's like nothing, let everybody do what they want to. Then there's like, here's the doc or web page, internal web page. It's the guidelines, like we talked about earlier. It's like, you will do this, you must do that, you should do this kind of guidelines. Better than nothing. But a lot of times people read it, they forget it, or they don't come across it. They design something, they ship it, it's like, oops, I screwed up. Next step is auditing, which is go check to see if they're doing it the right thing and flag them if they're not, and have them fix it. Again, that's better than even just the doc, but you still can end up having things leak out, and then it costs time and energy to go fix them. Even better is the guardrails, the controls that just, like, when I go design the API, it is by definition compliant, because I can't make an incompliant one because the tooling won't let me. And so if you take a look at anything when it comes to enforcing consistency, whether it's security, reliability, consistency of UX, consistency of APIs, you want to be on that end of the spectrum of the controls. Right. But the controls also have to not get in the way either. And so they can't cause too much friction, and they can't stop people from doing the things they need to do. So obviously, much more expensive to implement that side of things. But where it's really high impacts, high stakes, that's where you want to be.
That feels very. They use that term shift left, right? People love.
That's exactly what shift left is. Is exactly that end of that whole spectrum right there.
Yeah. That shift left, it's such a like a corporate-y, businessy person thing to do in like meetings with executives and stuff like that. But what you're really saying is catch it early, because a bug is cheaper before it ships.
Yeah,
an inconsistency. Once you have shipped the org chart, they've seen what's going on. When I used to work in like XML in the SOAP days, Simple Object Access Protocol, many years ago, we would talk about, like, it's just an IDL, right? It's an interface definition language, and it's choosing to expose stuff. And we would always use the analogy, because I'm all about analogies, of there's what's going on in the kitchen, and there's what you choose to put on the menu. And like if there's rats in the kitchen, you don't want to put rats on the menu. And if you can get rid of the rats without the menu finding out, then that would be like ideal. And that analogy has served me well for almost 30 years. This is interesting. Where would I go and learn more about this? This is like, it's leadership, it's cloud architecture. Like I wouldn't even know, like shipping the org chart in quotes is a really great term and I like it, but I don't know where I would give a call to action for me and listeners to learn more about how not to ship the org chart.
I don't have any good references either. I'm sure that there's books out there on leadership and product design that cover these things though. I from an engineering background, I didn't get exposed to those kinds of books. And so my learning of this has been on the job.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Like it's a very big concept. There's articles on it online. If I find some, I will go and put them in the show notes. This is an opportunity for us to ask the audience if you recommend books that bridge leadership in the squishy, businessy sense and like, this is high level CTO. Hey, look, we have a CTO here. Chief architect type conversations. And if you are, whether you're in a big company or a small company, just being aware that maybe we don't want to ship the org chart, and then what systems can be put in place to shift left.
And again, identifying the systems or surface areas where it's most, the impact of shipping the org chart is the highest, so you can prioritize those things. That's
a great point. Cool. Well, I felt like I learned something there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did too.
All right. Well, hopefully you're enjoying Mark and Scott Learn Too. If you'd like to hear particular topics, please let us know. Reach out to us on social media. This is just a podcast that's getting started. We're trying to figure out what we want it to be, but we know that Mark and I learn for a living. We want you to feel great about learning for a living. So please review, share with your friends. Let us know what you'd like us to learn so that we can help you learn as well. This has been an episode of Mark and Scott Learn Too. Thank you for making it this far.